we're all pluralist. We all accept other people's ways of doing things. We're all pluralist until it becomes difficult. And one of the things we want to do is, if you like, map the coastline of where it's difficult for us. It's the same with inclusivity. Everybody is inclusive until it becomes difficult for them. And so the question is, where is it difficult? So if you say, okay, we're absolutely inclusive of dyslexia, we're inclusive of autism, we're inclusive of ADHD, and then when something like that goes wrong and people aren't happy with it, people then treat you differently. One of the questions we might want to ask is, well, okay, where does that inclusivity end? Or where does the stretchiness of that inclusivity start to become a little bit tight? Where do you pass the stretchiness? Where does it just go floppy, if you like? Where doesn't it bounce back anymore? I suppose I began the journey when I was living in Germany. And for about 25 years now, for 24, 25 years, I've been working in neurodiversity awareness, specifically dyslexia awareness. I try to raise awareness of dyslexia from an intercultural perspective. And this goes deep in many different areas. So I work in universities around Europe. I've worked in university institutions in Britain, although you wouldn't necessarily call them universities. And I've I'm on the board of directors of a couple of places, I've just started, or I'm just in the process of setting up something called Neuroconverse, which is will be an online academic magazine, online academic journal for neurodiversity issues.
Wow. So what I'd like to say is that you're keeping busy.
Yes. it's that collision of busyness and bad organization and poor time management that keeps us all going, isn't it?
So Martin, from your kind of just sort of early perspective of let's just say, dyslexia, how is this kind of perceived in different countries in the way that from your own kind of experiences?
Well, one of the reasons I started doing what I do is because I was living in Germany, and there was, and to be honest with you, there still is a lack of true awareness, or a lack of a breadth and a depth of awareness in Germany. And this is hardly surprising. Different Bundesländer, different states in Germany have different understandings of it, different measurements, different definitions of it. You talk about diversity and inclusivity in Germany, and it is invariably gender and ethnicity. That's what diversity and inclusivity means in Germany: gender and ethnicity. Very recently, with a wonderful woman called Professor Claudia Lemke, and a few others, a guy called Niels Klorman I'm working with as well, in the Harriet Taylor Mill Institute of the Hochschule für Wirtschaft und Recht in Germany. We did something called a Werkstattgespräch, essentially a workshop, a presentation sort of seminar on the intersections of neurodiversity and gender. And it was eye-opening for a lot of people, because it's not something that people talk about over there. And so neurodiversity is way down the list of people's understanding in terms of any form of diversity. And therefore, the likelihood of people having a good grasp on what it is. So I was a teacher in Germany, and none of my fellow teachers were talking about it. I had students who were clearly dyslexic, and there was no provision for them. And so I thought, I've got to start raising awareness of this, because I'd only just found out myself about, maybe 6 or 8 months earlier. And so for me, it was very raw. And I remember when I came out of the closet, so to speak, it was because my work was fine. I was everyone was happy with the output, but I had to travel, and I would get timetables mixed up all the time. This is a big thing for me. My executive function isn't great. And so I read the timetables wrong. I get on a train to the wrong city, or I get on the wrong train or something. And this had happened a number of times, and I thought, well, instead of just lumping this onto my company, I've got to fess up and explain why. And so I said, look, the reason is, I'm dyslexic. The phrase that everybody was using at the time was "Ich bin Legastheniker," which isn't a particularly positive way of putting it these days. It's not seen as a positive way of putting it. And Gary, the boss, sort of sat down with me and said, "Oh yes, we're very, very understanding." But from that moment on, everything that went wrong in the company was my fault, because I became the Prügelknabe. I became the whipping boy. I became very much the Zundenbock. I can't remember what the English word is, but I became the guy that you could blame, essentially, and that hit hard, because they didn't realize that this was prejudice, but it was clear prejudice, and it was clear discrimination, and so I thought I need to help people understand what this is.
Do you think that was the case because because you mentioned about your dyslexia, so to speak, and they always presumed, oh, so from now on you're always going to mess up, or there's always going to be a problem. So we're just expecting, we're just awaiting for you to do something wrong, so then we can just say, oh, well, that must have really kind of hit the confidence side of it, because a lot of the things that you're struggling with anyway, and all we're trying to do really is just for someone to not treat you any differently, but just to understand and God forbid, some support. But that must have been quite tricky.
Yeah. So instead of putting in place any accommodations, which is what you would expect a company to do in let's say, the United Kingdom, or you'd hope a company would do in the United Kingdom, they just, as I said, they basically expected me to mess up. And not only that, but every time anything messed up, they assumed that it was because of me. So on the one hand, there was this kind of shame and embarrassment that I was looked upon as a walking confusion, as a walking time bomb for something to go wrong, which doesn't do anything for your confidence. And on the other hand, there was an anger that was building up inside me that went wrong. It wasn't my fault, and people are assuming it was me. And how can I explain this to them? And so, yeah, this I've talked to other people who have been in similar positions, and it wasn't an isolated incident. This is the kind of thing that a lot of people seem to experience. So yeah, you get the lack of accommodation, you get this shame of being looked upon as a walking mess, and then you get the anger that comes with people blaming you for things that aren't your fault, based on quite frankly a lack of understanding.
I mean, it's really sad to hear this, and it's a common thread in the way that people are made to feel. But from a human nature point of view, if someone said to you, "Don't drop that glass," if I was to pick this glass up and I was to take it into the kitchen, I wouldn't think too much about whether I was going to drop it or not. But the minute someone says, "Don't drop that glass," it puts an added bit of pressure. If we took that as a scenario of you're always going to feel like you're going to mess up about certain things, that it is going to create that pressure, and we're only human, and whether you have dyslexia or you don't, these things are going to happen. And I think it is that added pressure, isn't it, that a mistake is a mistake, and we learn from our mistakes in this sense. But if you're not given any support or leeway in any way, shape, or form, and you're living in this fear bubble of thinking, if I mess up, it's going to bring shame, or it's going to bring, possibility of losing my job, all these things, that is an enormous amount of pressure that builds like building blocks.
That darling of the TED Talks and that darling of the internet, a guy called Simon Sinek, you'll have heard of him probably. He gave a talk once, and it was, I don't know where it was, but it was in a company. And what he said was absolutely right. He said, what's the difference between championship sort of skiers and non-championship skiers? And if you're skiing through a forest and you're concentrating on the trees because you're scared of hitting the trees, then you'll hit a tree. If you're concentrating on the path between the trees, you'll go down the path between the trees. And this is basically, I absolutely get that. I used to do a lot of karate. And if you try to do a high side kick and you're focused on not losing balance, you'll lose balance. If you're focused on the kick, you won't lose balance. And so exactly that. If other people are focusing you on the disasters that could occur, then the chances of the disasters occurring are higher, quite frankly. They simply are. And so I began my journey essentially by running some sort of education workshops for this company. And in fact, I remember very well, it's one of the things that it was almost a proof of the pudding. Someone was being cheeky. It was a friendly thing to do, but I mean, it was it's kind of a cheeky thing to do. The workshops were supposed to last, I think, 1.5 hours, and they started at 12:30 or something. And on the second workshop, somebody must have heard of what I was talking about in the first one. On the second workshop, it was something like 1:15, and someone said, "You do know you've gone 15 minutes over your allotted time, don't you?" And I looked and went, "Oh yeah, sorry, I have. Oh, please forgive me. Can we just do 5 minutes?" And everyone started laughing that I hadn't gone near the allotted time, but I didn't know because I can't tell the time. And so people were just people were, I suppose, testing it, and it was absolutely true. And I say those times as a sort of made up time because I can't remember what the actual times were.
Yeah, no. What is the kind of I know you and I have had many conversations before, and we've spoken about our kind of travel woes or travel travel challenges. Let's just say this, and even last night, I went to yesterday. I went for a couple of meetings up in London, and I knew that I had to get the train back at 9:30 last night. I missed that train subsequently and ended up getting back at 1:20 this morning through different ways of getting home. And that's a very simple journey. That's up to London on the tube, back from London, back home. But in my head, I knew that these, it's almost become a thing, I guess, inherently in my head, thinking, I'm going to struggle with the time, I'm going to struggle with the train. But those things, they can bring a lot of anxiety, can't they? When you're in these situations, if it's a car journey and I miss the turn in, that's fine. But if I'm in a plane or a train and it's these, you're confined to their time schedules, and these, on a train, you can't just get off. You see what I mean? You're not in control of this. You have to abide by the times. What's been your kind of experiences around travel?
I'm a disaster area. Everybody knows I'm a disaster area, and you have to change. I've had to change my attitude. I mean, I've traveled through the wrong countries, to the wrong countries. I've turned up at the wrong airport. I've had to then rebook a plane and booked it to the wrong city. I am an absolute nightmare when it comes to traveling. And yeah, I miss trains all the time. I get to the station at the wrong time. So yeah, it's something which I've had to get used to, and I've had to essentially push through this. But when others rely on me, then that becomes a little bit trickier. Yeah. And so I always try to double check, and I always try to ask others to check the details that I've got these days, especially if there are others relying on me. And they might not realize what I'm doing. I'm just saying, "Oh, is this okay?" And they'll look at it and "Are you happy with this train?" And what I'm really saying is, I want you to be able to double check this. And even if they're not conscious that that's what's happening, they're looking at when the train sets off. So is it too early? Is it too late? They're looking at where it goes. So they are checking it, just not realizing that they're checking it. But I always have to do it.
It's those moments, isn't it? It's those realizations when you're on the wrong train and it's going to a destination that suddenly pops up. That fear of, oh my goodness, I've done it again. I mean, I think, when I tell people I got on the wrong plane and I was actually sat waiting for takeoff, and then to announce to the stewardess that I was on the wrong plane, for them, the sheer kind of confusion on their faces when I said this. And then this was in Malawi, and then I was asked to leave the plane while the plane engine was still going on. The door shut, the plane went off, and I was just stuck on the tarmac for 10 minutes until the coach came back. But it's almost become a part of a norm that these things can happen. But the interesting thing is, and this is what you mentioned, when someone's relying on you to be there at a certain time and do these things, if from a job point of view, if you're having to get there for, for a meeting, or and then you have to report back to the job that I've got on the wrong train, or I've done this, that then encroaches, doesn't it, into your actual job and your performance. And that's where the problems can lie from, if they're not understanding of what this could happen.
Something I often say, and I often start, so I work in ethics as well. That's one of the areas that my PhD was in, was ethics. So I run ethics courses. And one of the things I say at the beginning of many ethics courses, not all of them, is that we're all pluralist. We all accept other people's ways of doing things. We're all pluralist until it becomes difficult. And one of the things we want to do is, if you like, map the coastline of where it's difficult for us. It's the same with inclusivity. Everybody is inclusive until it becomes difficult for them. And so the question is, where is it difficult? So if you say, okay, we're absolutely inclusive of dyslexia, we're inclusive of autism, we're inclusive of ADHD, and then when something like that goes wrong and people aren't happy with it, people then treat you differently. One of the questions we might want to ask is, well, okay, where does that inclusivity end? Or where does the stretchiness of that inclusivity start to become a little bit tight? Where do you pass the stretchiness? Where does it just go floppy, if you like? Where doesn't it bounce back anymore? So yeah, often when, and I say when because it does happen, when I get on the wrong train, get to the company in the wrong city, that I should be in Manchester, not Leeds, or when I get on the wrong train and arrive late, or even if it's, getting the bus connections wrong afterwards, it doesn't happen much. I mean, don't refuse to employ me because I'm going to mess things up. But don't be massively surprised if it does happen. That's with any neurodiverse freelancer or business person. Don't be massively surprised when it happens. But when people then react in a way that isn't, as it were, accepting of that, then the questions about what inclusivity means start to become real, because everybody can say we're inclusive. It's very easy to say you're inclusive and to say we understand all about dyslexia, we understand all about neurodiversity. But then when something happens that puts your back up, that makes your little hair stand up on the back of your neck, what do you do about that? Because you can't help the reaction. No one can help the reaction. No one should be ashamed for being frustrated with a dyslexic person for doing X, Y, and Z. But the interesting point comes at how we then behave towards that, and how we reflect on our reactions as well, because our reactions are as much a part of ourselves as they are of the person we're reacting to. So yeah, I think what you're talking about gets very deeply to the heart of what we talk about when we talk about inclusivity.
Orcam Learn. World's most innovative learning enhancement solution, designed specifically for people with learning challenges. Personal AI, natural language processing, sleek design, high-resolution visual sensor, laser capture, aim and frame, laser pointer, one-word focus. Read text aloud from any surface. Full-page text capture.
While those who Mary saw slunk or hurried about with ashy and scared faces.
Let's read.
Go ahead and start reading.
Why did you come? She said to the strange woman. I will not let you stay. Send my ayah to me.
That was wonderful. Well done.
In-depth web app. Bluetooth connectivity. Safe to use in school exams. Designed to empower. K-12 through college. Increased independence and confidence. A friction-free learning experience. Orcam Learn.
And how do you think, I guess because we live and breathe this, day in, day out, personally, and again, from all the incredible work you do in the educational sector, in the different countries that you work in, how do you think an organization, if we just took an organization, not just the educational side of it, if we took an organization, how do you think, and again, this is just, your kind of personal suggestion, not facts or figures in this. What do you think is kind of some of the steps that they can start taking to be more, as we put it, inclusive and understand it a little bit more for individuals that struggle with, as they would put it, quite simple tasks? Because if we were taking travel, for instance, and we were saying someone is going to be traveling to X, Y, Z, all these different things, and these problems can occur, the amount of work that someone would have had to have done beforehand to think about the travel, live and breathe the travel, and then go through that travel, and then realize there was a mistake, that emotional turmoil would be massive. To then be taken aside afterwards and made to feel bad after that is even worse. How do you think organizations can make I guess some changes towards individuals that work for them?
One of the things is it depends on the organization. I mean, there is no one size fits all way of doing it. So it depends on what the organization does. It depends on the size of the organization. It depends on the culture that the organization comes from, which is something we might talk about later. But in one of the things that I do is when I give people awareness training, for instance, I don't tell them what working memory problems are. I give them activities and exercises which bring working memory challenges to them, so they can empathize with it, they can see it from the inside. There needs to be disclosure, there needs to be a culture of disclosure, there needs to be a culture of safety, and there needs to be, as it were, an inclusive element to how people go about things. So when I say there needs to be a culture of disclosure, I know a very large charity, and an excellent charity, in fact, where in the local offices, the manager has been very open about her mental health challenges. This has allowed other people to be open about their mental health challenges. And suddenly they're talking and they're listening to each other and they're sympathizing with each other. To an extent, they're empathizing with each other. So this is a culture change that's come from the top. Another thing that you see an awful lot is where you see, as it were, inclusivity workshops, where people on various neurodiverse spectra come together and talk about their experiences, where people who don't realize perhaps that they're dyslexic, or people who don't realize that they have ADHD, start to think, actually, I'm quite similar to that. So a lot of it is essentially to form human connections, because we're not in an organization. As soon as the humans start being looked upon as it were, cogs in a wheel, and you hear people saying, "Oh, I'm just a cog in a wheel." Nobody is a cog in a wheel. I think that recently there was the post office scandal, and the chief investigator who was in trouble in front of the magistrate, or in front of the committee. He said at one point, I was just a small cog in a wheel. No, he wasn't. He was a human being dealing with human beings. And as soon as we start looking at people as cogs in wheels, then we lose the humanity of the people that we're looking at. So I think that there's a whole range of things that people can do. When we start discussing the issues, we don't just discuss them. We essentially try to bring them to people. So what is it to have executive function challenges? Well, let's do this exercise so that we understand what it feels like. What is it to be neurodiverse or neurodivergent? Well, let's have a talking shop. What is it to have a culture where people feel happy and open in talking about this? Well, it starts somewhere. Where does it start? Well, it starts with me. And so I think having cultures and listening to other people and trying to understand what's going on from the inside rather than just trying to learn about it, these are good starting points.
Absolutely. And culture is such a massive thing. If you look at any organization, if you were to apply to join an organization, and some companies do it, some companies don't. Some say our culture is this, and almost sometimes it's how you then have to think to yourself, okay, I mean, applying for a job from a neurodiverse point of view is tricky. Applying for a job in general is a tricky scenario anyway. But if you're looking at this, you're breaking down the job spec. And you're going, okay, do I fit these? Do I tick these boxes? And, can I do this? Is it hybrid? Is it working in the office? How many times I travel? What do I travel? All these different things. And then we get into the culture side of it. And it says, okay, so every Friday we go out for pizzas and we have games nights and we do this. And that's great. Again, and I'm not knocking anyone that does that in any way, shape, or form. I think it's great and inclusive. But that could not be your culture. In the sense of the thought of going out for pizza and on a Friday night afterwards and this could be very tricky.
Terrifying.
So it
It
could
could be terrifying, and it could bring on all sorts of anxiety.
Yeah.
Especially, let's say, for people on the spectrum, people on the autism spectrum, it can bring on all sorts of anxiety. One of the issues is I'm working on a project at the moment with people from Belgium and Romania and a number of European countries. And one of the things we're doing is we're asking autistic job seekers about the barriers to getting into jobs. And one of the things that's come through that we hadn't thought of before we started was this idea of company culture. And that if there is a hard and fast, almost concretized company culture, many autistic people feel that they don't belong in that culture before they even get to the point of applying for a position. And so you'll see a lot of people thinking, that's not for me, I'm not going for it. And actually, this idea of a company culture is stronger in some countries than it is in other countries. Very strong in Germany, for instance. I was surprised at how strong the company culture was. So I worked with companies like Gerling, which is an insurance company. They always talked about the Gerling company culture. Kaufhof, one of the big retail chains, very strong on the Kaufhof company culture. I worked for Bosch. Again, I worked with Bosch. Again, very deep in the Bosch company culture. They all talked about it. It was something that it was almost something that no one didn't mention. And again, with Volkswagen, I've worked a lot with people from Volkswagen, and there is a very strong sense of company culture. Now, this can be great, but it can also be very, very off-putting, and it can be very restrictive. And by the way, when people talk about company cultures, very few companies, when they sit down and try to impose this culture, because they're almost always imposed, by the way, when they sit down and impose this culture, very few of them start with the word inclusive. Very few of them. They start with, positive or loving. Inclusive will be in there, but they won't give much thought to what they mean by inclusive. And one of the reasons they don't give much thought to what they mean is what happens when somebody is different. And that's a really interesting question.
It really is. It's always been a really fascinating topic, especially growing into the corporate career and becoming, senior kind of management level. Looking back on it, when kind of the near kind of naughty, so to speak, of those kind of those years, and how companies have changed and cultures seems to be, especially 5 years ago, the word culture used to be like the buzzword. It used to just be bounded around everywhere in the sense of we need a company culture. We need to come. And it's almost, how do you create a company culture? Is it the company then decides between a few of the board and said, right, we want to make sure that we do this. And it was always interesting. The organizations that I worked with many, many years ago, the culture seemed to be, okay, so how can we best get our customer to like our brand? Yeah. And then it was always this kind of level. And I was thinking, the customer like your brand because of the product or service that you offer. How do you get people to love working in your organization? And then, so that was the kind of, and I'm not saying all companies did this, but before, that was my experience of people with the word culture. It was kind of, okay, so we need to make sure that the employees are happy. We need to create a culture. So this is this. And I think it was, when we talk about inclusivity, the minute you leave all the decisions up here and you don't include everyone around, that's when it gets a little bit tricky. That's when you have high levels of staff turnover, and a lot of things happen, and even people stop applying to work for an organization.
Yeah, and you can see what I came up with this idea of an ethical narrative. Now, a lot of people can talk about company culture, but I think a company culture and an ethical narrative are slightly different. But an ethical narrative is essentially the thread of behaviors that you can see and that you can therefore predict how somebody might behave in the future. And you can see, on the one hand, that, for instance, good examples could be companies like Google, who have a great outward company culture. Everybody wants to work for Google because we all know what we feel we're going to get. And then when you look at the actions of Google, and when you look at how they've treated their employees, when you look at what they do with the data that the employees give, when you look at all of these things, you start to build up a picture that there is, if you like, a story, a narrative going through, that this isn't an ethical company at all. It really isn't. And that when we start to see that, that's the culture. The culture is not what you impose. The culture is, if you like, what you can see and how people feel. And if you like, how people interact with each other and how comfortable they are interacting with each other. Because there are, I'm going to tell a very quick story.
Please do.
2 companies I worked for, and they were very similar. They both worked in very similar areas. Now, the story I'm going to tell isn't about neurodiversity, but it's easily transferable to neurodiversity. You'll understand why. I had an operation on my knee about, oh gosh, can't remember when it was, maybe 8-9 years ago. The 5th operation I've had on my knee. So I can almost unscrew it and put it over there these days. And I was then, this was in December, and I was offered some work in January from both of these 2 companies on consecutive weeks. So I was able to do both jobs. And I thought, this is great. I'm going to really enjoy this. I had a friend who worked for one of the companies, and she emailed me and said, Martin, look, I know you've had an operation on your knee. It might be a little bit delicate for you to get around. Why don't you write to the director and ask him whether it's okay to work? Do you work on the ground floor so you don't have to keep doing the stairs all the time? And I thought, what a lovely thing to say. So I did. I wrote to the directors of both companies, explained the situation, said I've just had an operation on my knee. I'd be really grateful if you could allow me to work on the ground floor and to do the workshops and to do the training on the ground floor. One company, in one company, the director herself came in on the Sunday before the Monday I was supposed to be working and moved her own office furniture out of her office so that I could use that office as a training space. The other company's director, he wrote to me and said, well, if you can't get up and downstairs, maybe it's not a good idea for you to work for us, and took the work away. Now, this is a perfect example of how inclusivity and company culture collide suddenly, where the only issue was I was on crutches. Maybe I wouldn't even have been on crutches at that point. I don't know. I think I wouldn't have been, because they take your crutches away after the operation usually. So the only issue would have been that I had some mobility issues, and one company bent over backwards. The director herself bent over backwards to make sure that I was accommodated for, and the other director just took the work away because it was inconvenient for them. And so company culture shines really, really brightly. And as I said, it's not about neurodiversity, but it is about inclusivity, and it's about accommodations, and it's about as it were, physical diversity. And so, yeah, you can see it.
I think is well, it's you know, it's an incredible story, and thank you so much for sharing those. And it is absolutely, you're absolutely right. It does that divide in the sense of what good looks like, in the sense of what common decency looks like, and again, you know, saying that you're not the right fit because you may struggle coming in this and this. You can see how that then rolls into other decisions that are probably made within the organization, and how other people are made to feel.
Yeah.
So yeah. It always, when I think about inclusivity in organizations, and it's sometimes it's the small things. So for me, being asked a question off the cuff, certain subjects, I'm fine. I love to talk. I can talk about different things and everything. If it's facts and figures, or if it's something else that I feel that, not that I can answer them, but if it's just someone throws something at you in the sense of a question, put that in a working environment. Say you walk into the office and you go to make a cup of coffee or something first thing in the morning, and then the boss walks past and says, "Hi, Darren. How you doing?" You're like, "Okay, great." And then it's okay. How's that going? Those little moments for me would be really tricky. And it's not because I don't know the answer. It's because I feel, because it's almost trying to get your memory to actually think. I've been in situations in the past, but with undiagnosed dyslexia, where I've actually had to make up what I did on the weekend because it's such a simple question. I'll go in on a Monday morning and they say, "What did you do what did you get up to the weekend?" And my mind would just freeze. And I'd come up with, like, I don't know, I'd say I went jet skiing. And they were like, "Oh, okay, you went jet skiing." And then we're here thinking, why did I say jet skiing? And then it's
What did you say?
but it's these moments, in all seriousness, it's all these moments
Yeah.
where you feel, why did I say that? Because I felt like I had to say something.
It's
And
what I call the cult of spontaneity. That those people who are able to be spontaneous are somehow deified, or they're honored more than others are. Now, this genuinely hurts many neurodivergent people. So it can hurt quite badly people on the autism spectrum, the idea that you've got to be spontaneous. I have the same, but it's with future. What are you doing on the weekend? I have no idea. When is the weekend? What is a weekend? Let me think. And I usually just go, "Oh, I'm working." That's my stock answer, because I have no idea. But I might have plans, but I don't know what they are. And so, yeah, this cult of spontaneity. What are the facts and figures? Can you tell me this? Especially, and this is really bad, and it's where actually a lot of neurodivergent people are excluded, but very few people realize this. If you're at a conference, if you're on if you're giving a presentation, people ask questions. It's not usually acceptable to say, "Let me find out." That's not usually acceptable. People expect you to know. And what this does is it means that a lot of neurodivergent people feel less comfortable being on panel discussions where questions may be spontaneous, or they feel less comfortable giving a presentation, not because they're not able to give a presentation, but because they feel enormous amounts of anxiety at what's going to happen after the presentation, the conversations they're going to have, or the questions that are going to be fired at them. It's also, by the way, you get the cult of spontaneity very deeply embedded in recruitment processes. And recruitment processes for neurodivergent people, particularly autistic neurodivergent people, recruitment processes can be terrifying things to navigate. And if the expectation is you have to be able to talk off the top of your head, those of us with executive function challenges, who maybe have working memory difficulties, or who find sort of navigating through future plans maybe a little bit, "Oh my God, what am I doing now?" It can be a little bit traumatic. We fail at those hurdles. And so when a company says, "Oh, we're inclusive," and they don't look at that kind of hurdle, then this culture of inclusivity has got to be questioned, because it's been replaced by a cult of spontaneity. And why should people have to be spontaneous? What's necessarily the advantage of spontaneity over, for instance, somebody researching something and getting back to you in half an hour? What's the advantage? There might be advantages in some situations, not in all situations. And so, yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. Absolutely, have.
It's really fascinating that one of my, being an entrepreneur, what is an entrepreneur, but being, someone who likes to create things. Let's just use that terminology. My favorite show for years was Dragon's Den. Okay, and it was in a sense that it was just this I don't know, this magical kind of show where dreams are made and all these different things, right? And whether it's you're pro or you're against it, but genuinely from a business point of view, I used to find it fascinating. Someone would go in and talk about their what they've created, and is it investable, is it not? Do you know, one of the things that always throws me, and even if I watch the new series now, the one thing that always throws me is when they go, "Okay, can you tell me about the turnover and the facts and the figures," in the sense of what was your turnover, what was this? Now, I know for anyone who's listened to this in business, they always say, if you're in business, you need to know your numbers. Okay, I get it. Okay, I understand this, right? but it's this pressure of when they turn around and they say, and you just have these incredible people on on there, and they're reading off what their turnover was, what last year was, what the projection, this is and this. I'm lost, Martin. I've got to be honest. When
As would be Richard Branson, for instance.
yeah, with his analogy that he didn't know what was it gross or
Gross and net. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Gross and net.
and this was many years into his business journey, wasn't it? And
Yeah.
I think it was an accountant or someone pulled him out and they drew a fishing net and they said everything in the net and then everything outside and that analogy. And he said, you know, he said once someone showed him this diagram, really simple diagram, he knew from this. But it is interesting, isn't it? From taking that out, to putting it to one side, that working memory side of it, where you're expected in a certain situation to just deliver on a memory basis, it can be not very inclusive.
It can be, and I know somebody who actually she suffers forms of anxiety for this very reason, actually, in these situations, and she went on Dragon's Den. And she and I had been to America many years ago on a business delegation from the British government of all things, and we were counted among the most exciting young emerging British entrepreneurs, and we were sent to a place called Babson College, which is apparently the world's leading entrepreneurial university or something. And we did a kind of Dragon's Den there. Before Dragon's Den was around. This is 2004, so maybe it was just about to start. And we did a kind of Dragon's Den there. And a couple of things, first of all. Well, first of all, I got past the first round, and then I was told that I was going to have to present a business plan with forecasts and all sorts of things. And I panicked. And the people saw me panicking. A lot of people there respected me because they thought, oh, Martin knows what he's talking about. And then they saw me panicking with numbers and projections and profit and loss and just losing the number, because my dyscalculia is quite strong, actually. That's one of my kryptonites, numbers. And I freaked. And then later in the day, I came back and I had created this wonderfully visual business plan. There were no numbers in it, or very few numbers in it, but it was clear what was going on. And I presented it. And the people I presented it to, by the way, they were angel investors, they were large organizations, they were proper business people. And they loved it. They thought, oh, this is a beautiful business plan. And everybody else then started copying my business plan. And I was really proud of it. And we got through. So this lady and I, we got through to the final. And in the end, we kind of shared the trophy, which is, we will give you so much money if you give us so much of your business. And then neither of us really wanted to at the time. But it was a great experience. Well, she then went on Dragon's Den. I think it was the first series or something. It was the first series of Dragon's Den. And she was presenting her product. And her product was essentially wellness. It was homeopathic remedies, herbalism, aromatherapy. I think there's a lot of aromatherapy in it. And I knew from having seen her going through the Dragon's Den in America, I knew how she was going to react. And it was painful to watch because they started to ask her all sorts of questions. And as soon as she started to stammer, they went in for the kill. And by the end of it, she had mental health issues. She had to then change the name of her company so people wouldn't associate it with the car crash that was on TV. And the questions that they were asking were irrelevant. I mean, I saw they were irrelevant to whether whether her products were going to be good, whether it could be successful, whether people would buy it. They were irrelevant. They just smelt blood. And for somebody who's not well capable of handling that kind of anxiety, and you don't have to be on any neurodiverse spectrum to be like that, by the way, but the idea that you don't subscribe to our cult of spontaneity, and we are going to tear you to shreds publicly for that. It was a cruel experience. I haven't watched Dragon's Den since.
Wow, that's looking back on it. There's been a I guess it's is it set up for businesses, or is it set up for for television,
TV,
as in
yeah,
to gain the viewership in their
yeah.
sense? But I know that I'd never put my I willingly put myself in that situation, but and that's a sad thing, because with all intentions, the lady you mentioned, incredible person, doing incredible work, incredible business, and being just in an environment which is literally
Yeah.
created in a way that's
Mm,
a
mm,
really a terrible situation in
mm.
that sense, which on the reverse side could have been so different had they asked different questions, or had they not smelt blood, so to speak, as you mentioned, and saw weakness in their eyes and thought, actually, we're going to go for this. And I think that's the sad reason behind it.
It's the sad thing. And then, so this wasn't an isolated incident either. So, okay, this was for the TV. Whoever it was at the time, Simon Woodruff or whatever it is, these people, I'm not going to slander them or whatever, but it seems from an outsider's perspective that the dragons were on Dragon's Den for their own brand rather than for the companies. That's how it sometimes seemed from the outside. Well, that may be the case on TV, but then you go to, for instance, you go to a school environment where you get neurodiverse kids. Now, these are some of the most vulnerable people around, and depending on where you are in the world, the understanding of neurodiversity may be higher or may be lower. And if you're in a place where that understanding is lower, these kids are going to suffer. I guarantee it. These kids are going to suffer. And there's no way, well, I say there's no way they'll have a chance of getting out of that. The anchors, the ball and chain that's going to be attached to them, trying to get out of school, trying to make a success of themselves in life, trying to make a social success of themselves in life after having felt isolated and alienated at school. This is quite cruel. And different areas of the world. So, for instance, in Bavaria, there was a study published fairly recently, within about last 10 years, 10 or 11 years, that showed that Bavarian teachers genuinely believe that your dyslexia is your fault, and that it's not their job to do anything about it. And so what you've got is you've got the weight of expectation. You've got essentially victim blaming. You've got the weight of expectation on the shoulders of 5-year-old, 6-year-old children, where you've got adults who could do something about it, saying, nothing to do with me, nothing to do with me. And this is the kind of culture that we have to change, the culture of belief, the culture of how we look at others, and how we look at others and their vulnerabilities. Because absolutely every single one of us is broken. There's not one of us who isn't broken. And so how is it possible to not look at somebody else and empathize? As long as you can connect with your own fallenness, as it were, you can connect with your own brokenness, you can then empathize with others. And then of course you get cultures, whatever we mean by cultures, where that's not encouraged. You're not encouraged to look at yourself as vulnerable or broken or weak yourself. You've got to be the boss, and the boss is strong. And that kind of company culture, that kind of educational culture, that kind of societal culture, that bleeds into everything. And therefore it bleeds into, for instance, yes, it bleeds into businesses, and it bleeds into schools. And, I am strong, I am the boss, I know what's right. And when you're looking at things like that, then this is quite an oppositional way of seeing other human beings. Where we start looking at ourselves as, I know where I'm broken, I know where I need help, I know where I'm vulnerable, then it's impossible to look at others without seeing them as similar to yourself. And that's where empathy starts.
Absolutely. And do you feel, if we're in a situation in school where we feel isolated and we don't really belong there, and then you go into the workforce and then you think to yourself, where do I belong? That sense of belonging is powerful. It's something that we all strive to. We want to belong, whether it's an activity like you and I do, martial arts, or if it's painting or crockery or football or sports. There's a human nature to want to have that sense of belonging. And I feel, when I speak to, the many thousands of people that we've spoken to over the years, that sense of belonging sometimes feels a bit lost, because it's almost like it seems like they're searching for it, and sadly never finding it.
I don't know about you, but I can't remember anybody from school. I remember a couple of people, but the school class sizes were about 20 to 30 kids, and I can remember maybe 3 of them, 4 of them. But I couldn't remember what they looked like. And this is from my entire time at school, really. And that says something. It says that I had no connection with anybody there. I've been in pubs or cafes or wherever with one of the few friends that I do have from school time, and someone's come up to us going, "Hey, it's Martin and Mark, isn't it?" And Mark's gone, "Oh, it's blah," and I sat there thinking, "Who are you? I have no memory of you." And this is partially because there was that complete alienation. There was a wall between me and society at school. I was massively alienated.
It is, the isolation part of it for my child, in the sense of the school side of it, being taken to the cabin and just kind of given, coloring books to occupy me for 5 years. In that sense, that element of isolation stays with you, regardless of how old you get and where you end up in your career in these things. But it is
I never believed that I fit in, or sometimes I do, but often I don't. And there are places that I've worked for years that I still don't feel that I fit in, or that I'm accepted, or that I have the level of respect that, and it's not that I want to be respected, but you need to have a level of respect to be able to feel that you're functioning with everybody else. And this isn't because of how they treat me. This is because of my history. It's because of my past. Because when you're taught, and you were taught this, when you were taught from an early age that you don't fit in, that you're not like other people, that you're not a success, that you're not clever, that you're not able to ... When you're taught that through your school life and even your home life sometimes, when you're taught that, then it's hard shaking that feeling, isn't it? It's hard shaking that feeling of being an imposter. And it's not imposter syndrome, by the way, because I'm aware of it. And so as soon as I'm aware of it, I don't have imposter syndrome. I just think I don't fit in. And then I think, come on, mate. You know you should. And I know. But I'm constantly having this conversation with myself.
Martin, we are sadly coming up to our time. I could speak to you all day. I honestly could. But it's been really fascinating how we started with one topic, in the sense of going around the world, and then we talked about culture, and we talked about so many other different facets as well, which has been absolutely incredible. Thank you so much, and we will speak to you very, very soon.
Mate, thank you. It's been a pleasure and an honor, really. Thank you.